Less than 2 weeks have passed since the tragedy in England, where 3 little girls lost their lives at the hands of a 17-year-old British. In March of this year, there was a mass shooting during a concert at Crocus City Hall in Moscow. Last December, the first mass shooting occurred at the Faculty of Arts at Charles University in Prague. Where do these psychopaths come from? Why do our children suffer a shaken society? Unceasing pain from the loss of loved ones, fears and anxiety of sending your child to school, to an activity club or a concert, a multitude of unanswered questions, a trauma that lasts a lifetime. Now we know where these psychopaths come from. We know who the architects of these events are, and we know why children kill other children. If you want to know what should be done to ensure that such events never happen again, and how to protect the lives of your children, stay with us. The topic of today's broadcast is school shootings and similarly themed attacks, which, as you will see today, operate on the same principle and are all just a preparatory phase for something much bigger. It might seem that there is no solution to this phenomenon, as we have recently been witnessing such a growing tendency.
Yes, the media all too often bring us news of these terrible acts where children die. And in society, we often hear an opinion that this is just a consequence of present-day degradation. We are experiencing a decline of our society. Society is divided. There are too many murders, too many wars, and too much evil. And the way our children react to it all is just a consequence. Maybe we thought the same until a certain time as well, but everything changed when we watched the documentary The Impact and the video appeal by Dr. Egon Cholakian.
I'll just mention here, sorry to interrupt you, that the video or the documentary film, The Impact, is not a work of any of us, neither from Allatra nor from the creative society. We are very grateful to the creators because we ourselves have come to see huge mindsets within ourselves, and it helped us immensely to see ourselves in the light of the events happening today.
What this film, The Impact, revealed, the horror being inflicted on our innocent children and teenagers, could not leave us indifferent. Here at this table, we are parents of kids of various age groups. It is terrifying that someone is manipulating and using our children so that they kill other children. As we understood from the Impact documentary, school shootings are just a stepping stone to something much more horrifying and terrible that is being prepared for all of humanity, namely civil wars and the upcoming civilizational war.
You mentioned Dr. Egon Cholakian, and of course, I will take this opportunity to share very important information with all of you. Many of you who heard the latest statement from the national security expert, Dr. Egon Cholakian, know that he also mentioned the plans being made to eliminate him. Just before this broadcast, we received reliable information from trustworthy sources that the group assigned to assassinate him was apprehended by special services at the preparation phase, and they are now closely cooperating in the investigation and giving testimony. I even have a photo of this group's arrest. I have photos of what was found with them: sniper pistols, other firearms, and money. It's important to understand that they were detained at the moment when they were preparing an assassination attempt on Dr. Cholakian. Honestly, I cannot say exactly who those people are or when it happened, yesterday or whenever, but the group that was planning Cholakian's elimination has been detained. It's great that Americans know how to do their job. Remember, Dr. Cholakian warned that certain individuals did want to eliminate him. And now think about it. How is it even possible that someone organized an assassination attempt on this man? After all, he is one of the few people on the planet who can and knows how to confront climate threats. And they tried to assassinate such a man? They want to kill him? Yet there's another important piece of information. As we were informed, the detainees are now fully cooperating and providing concrete testimony, including the testimony about who guided them and who controlled the entire process. Of course, now there is another question. Who is behind school shootings? In the Impact documentary, a global conspiracy has been thoroughly described and exposed under the name of anti-cult organizations. This is particularly interesting from the perspective of us, as participants of the creative society and Allatra, because it closely affects us. Those Nazis led by rat seers, who are currently in Russia and have infiltrated the Russian Orthodox Church, are manipulating and coding people worldwide, including the top officials in Russia. Dr. Cholakian spoke about it in detail in his address, where he appealed to the Russian president. Under the banner of rat seers, those fascists disguised as Orthodox priests are seeking revenge. That's why they infiltrated Russian Orthodox Church in order to quietly destroy Russia from within. Why Russia specifically? Because Russia played a significant role in the eradication of fascism. We need to realize that these monsters stop at nothing. For their perverse manipulations, they have chosen our children. These anti-cult monsters are drenched in children's blood. And if we want to do something about it, it's essential that we collectively expose this manipulation and coding of our children.
You call them fascists, and I find it very striking, because an observant person cannot miss how the events unfolding today in the Russian Federation closely mirror the scenario that Nazi Germany followed before the outbreak of World War II. It doesn't matter whether we're looking at the ideology of superiority or the dominance of a particular religion in the country, whether it's the persecution of people who resist the totalitarian regime or the massive war machine of propaganda that operates there. Just as Nazism dismantled Germany during World War II, anti-cultism is now dismantling Russia, effectively destroying it. And yes, Egon Cholakian talks about this.
Honestly, it's exactly the same as what Hitler was doing. They want to establish a single world government, a government of terror, which is absolutely indispensable for them. And friends, for those monsters to achieve it, they need to provoke controlled chaos. That's absolutely crucial for them. They need to divide people at any cost. So look at what is happening now. They seek to evoke distrust in governments, authorities, police, public institutions, and so on. But it's not that easy. First and foremost, they need to instill fear in people, which they somehow manage to do. Their goal is to divide individual states and destroy them from within. This doesn't only apply to Russia, it applies to all democratic countries currently on the planet. It's incredible how they operate. And if we take a closer look, we can see that history is unfortunately repeating itself. Just like in Nazi Germany, today the state security services in Russia and Ukraine have covertly transformed into Gestapos, while their prosecutor general's offices have turned into SS.
We can also see how this scenario from Russia is now being gradually implemented in Europe and the United States. But what is very important for our viewers to realize is that these anti-cult organizations do not defend any country, nor do they advocate for the interests of any individual country. They operate above geopolitics. the only thing they strive for is to gain absolute power over the entire world and establish totalitarianism.
And we know that the names of those perpetrators are already identified and they will all be brought to justice. Also, it is very important to note that many influential people in power are under the influence and manipulation of anti-cultists, including Mr. Putin, as you said. It was discussed in the Impact documentary, and Dr. Cholakian also talked about it. But Mr. Putin still has authority. He has the power and ability to change the situation. Dr. Cholakian made it clear that in order for Putin to do that, he has to learn about it and to want to cope with it. I would also like to add how obvious it is that it's all an anti-cult scenario. Let's take, for example, the fact that the war between Russia and Ukraine continues, unfortunately. And we know that the Ukrainian leadership is trying to get the Russian Orthodox Church out of the country, but on the other hand, it is absolutely incomprehensible and paradoxical that the Ukrainian leadership, at the behest of anti-cultists from ROC, is chasing innocent people from Alatra, volunteers who are trying to highlight the climate crisis, instead of addressing the war. Who is actually interested in such a situation?
It is crucial to understand the entire massive mechanism of what is happening, because indeed, at first glance, events that take place in various countries of the world might seem unrelated, given that those countries are geopolitical adversaries. Therefore, we highly recommend watching the documentary, The Impact, which puts all the pieces together and clearly shows the whole picture. Today, however, we will focus on the horrifying phenomenon of school shootings. Such events have been occurring since people gained unrestricted access to firearms. However, in the past, these events did not receive such massive media coverage. The media used to report these events purely as facts, and there was no hidden manipulation in their reports. Yet, everything changed 30 years ago, particularly after the tragedy at Columbine High School, which changed the nature of the school shooting phenomenon. Nevertheless, this event has its roots in another event, which, perhaps at first glance, is seemingly completely unrelated. I specifically mean the Waco massacre in 1993, where nearly all the inhabitants of a compound, a group of about 80 people, affiliated with a branch of Christianity known as Davidians, lost their lives, almost all of them, including little children, at the hands of law enforcement agencies after a prolonged siege of the compound.
Creators of the Impact documentary reconstructed the Waco case and showed very clearly how the anti-cult organizations in America, which closely cooperated with anti-cult organizations in Russia at that time, were pulling the strings during the whole story. Anti-cultists managed to distort the image of Branch Davidians to such an extent that those people, who were never proven to have committed any crime and were never lawfully convicted, died in agony on their own land, including children and pregnant women, all before the eyes of America. Is this even possible? In this case, mass media also played a significant role, as paid journalists threw so much dirt on these people that the public ceased to view the Davidians as human beings with a right to their beliefs, and instead saw them as a terrorist group threatening children and society as a whole.
And what is even more shocking about this group of people is how it happened. Security forces and police, who were supposed to protect them, were the ones who carried out the brutal act and killed those innocent people.
Because this strongly negative image made this public execution seem acceptable. People thought it was right. Through articles in the media, people were so manipulated by what they read that they remained completely passive and silently watched what was happening.
Meanwhile, the media didn't even mention the names of people in the compound, turning them into a faceless and nameless group, essentially dehumanizing them.
Exactly. I looked into it because a few articles about what happened in Waco caught my attention. And all these articles describing the event had one specific common element. After this incident, people in America lost trust in the government. And that's exactly what the Impact documentary illustrates. What is the true cause of the Waco tragedy? Why did these people die? Because they were used for this very purpose. And the victims of this case were not just the Davidians themselves, but also everyone who was exposed to the informational terror they were supplied with through the media. We can see that this coding, which was launched back then and is still gaining momentum, has consequences that we observe even nowadays.
What's also interesting is that you might think, no one can manipulate or encode me. It is nonsense. But the Impact shows an incredible thing. These monsters actually demonstrated in a live broadcast how easy it is to manipulate people around them using audio equipment and other methods. You know what is absolutely drastic and crucial for me about Waco? How is it possible that FBI officers who undergo extensive background checks, how was it actually possible to manage to manipulate them so thoroughly within 52 days so that they refused any negotiations, wouldn't agree to anything, and then decided to assault the compound with a tank, inject gas inside, set the building on fire, and shoot those who tried to escape in the back? It was FBI.
For me, as a mother, the crucial information was why they decided to proceed with this violent assault, supposedly because they worried about children. But in the end, they killed those very children with gas that causes such spasms in the body that bones crack while the body is still alive. These are the same children for whom they allegedly launched the violent attack. That's insane.
It was only a pretext that they were doing it to protect those children who were ultimately killed with the hands of law enforcement.
We all know about the Twin Towers. It was also a massacre that led to widespread questioning of trust in government authorities. Every terrorist attack is essentially aimed at such an outcome. And because we have seen the documentary, The Impact, we now understand the background, that while the Twin Towers stood, 3 key events, terrorist attacks, occurred on U.S. soil that shook society in this way and were considered the biggest attacks. The first, as you've already heard, was the Waco siege. The second one was the Oklahoma City bombing, which was essentially a retaliation for Waco. And the third was the Columbine High School shooting, where the attacker's main motive was to surpass the death toll of the previous 2 attacks in order to be forever remembered in history. Columbine became the most publicized school shooting event, which inspired movies, books, and even fan clubs of the attackers started to emerge, leading to the absolute heroization of the perpetrators of such a horrific act. Since Columbine, such events have occurred in selected places around the world, and probably each of us has at least once asked the question, where do these psychopaths come from?
How does a person become this?
How does a teenager, an ordinary student, a beloved child, become a murderer? The Impact documentary showed us that the shooters themselves are actually victims. Victims of vile and disgusting manipulation. And if you are unaware of these techniques, if you don't know how they work, you or your child could become a victim too.
Maybe we should talk about what this method actually is, the one they used, because it was very thoroughly analyzed not only in the film The Impact, but also discussed by Dr. Chalakian in the video Crossroads. And this method is called puzzle coding. What is this technique? It's terrifying, to say the least, when we consider what it's really about. Essentially, the coders or manipulators use the highest level of manipulation techniques available. What's the foundation? The foundation is that they want to execute some destructive program, like a mass murder. They do this by creating a truly sophisticated method, where they break down the entire picture, the entire program, into small pieces of information, which include many implants that we call puzzles. These puzzles are then embedded into seemingly simple, completely unsuspicious information, which they widely disseminate through television, radio, online networks, and media. This information then basically reaches people and completely bypasses their critical thinking, going straight into the subconscious. The method is sophisticated because, in a specific individual, all these puzzles come together in the subconscious to form a clear program, to kill on a mass scale.
Which means that we are all exposed to it.
Absolutely everyone. And when you think about it, this process takes a long time. The entire preparation and process take months, even years, and it essentially flows through all media. The only common or fundamental aspect is that it happens in a pre-selected geographic area. Speaking about school shootings, I'd like to add that in this case, the approach is to select an area where, unfortunately, they want to target children. And then they start implanting those puzzle pieces of information through the media, evoking a thirst for fame. We hear phrases like, if you haven't lived a famous life, and if your name won't be remembered for centuries on all possible platforms, then your life was wasted. Basically, they exert enormous pressure on these young people, making them feel that if they aren't known and famous, their life has been completely meaningless, and this fear within them grows. Gradually, they narrow down the entire area to smaller and smaller spaces until they choose a school where this coding is targeting hundreds of people, hundreds of students. And in the end, it all comes together in one individual. Imagine, if you will, that we have a boat full of fishermen and they cast a net behind them. They sit on the deck, drink coffee, and it doesn't matter to them at all which child it will be. They just spread out the net, drink coffee, and wait for someone to get caught. And we can add that, as you mentioned, that basically the shooters themselves and the children are also victims. But this coding, when I watched it, and I think you did too, it was very, very sad. The coding is carried out on what they call a black or white canvas. A black canvas means that the shooter kills himself at the end, whereas coding on a white canvas is when, unfortunately, the shooter enjoys the fame, talks about it publicly, boasts about it, and lives off it. And what do the coders do in the end? The final step is that they use this entire horrific event, this terror, and continue to support it through audio and video in the media, sending it out in further waves and effectively preparing the next wave of massacres, another terrorist attack.
I'd like to add that you mentioned the main blame is on, or the main tool is the media. But I'd like to add that it's not the only tool because, unfortunately, in schools, those who give lectures are also committing these acts of terrorism when they themselves support these inhumane people. And through their lectures, they are implanting these kinds of information into our children. It should be essential for us to find out who is teaching our children, what kind of people they are. This is what we should be concerned about. We must start caring, my friends, if we want to have any chance at all.
It often happens that somebody organizes a symposium and invites a well-known deprogrammer to deliver a lecture. That's
Unbelievable.
unbelievable.
And it was the film The Impact that brought to our attention a very tragic event that took place in Prague in December 2023. We mention it only because the film The Impact highlighted that the shooter, David Kozak, had undergone a coding program. We want to state up front that we do not intend to either accuse or justify the shooter. We will simply share the facts that we noticed in this case, which we want to share with you, so that you can also see how this process works and what we discovered during our research. We know that this event was so tragic that it shocked not just the Czech Republic, as it was the first time something like this happened, but also the public in Slovakia and all of Europe. We searched for information, read many articles, and there is extensive information about the shooter and everything that happened before and after, which you can also find on Wikipedia. In one article, it was mentioned that David Kozak is widely known as a mass murderer. Exactly as you mentioned, a desire to be famous, a desire to become known within a very short time, might be the reason why children get caught in the thrown net. That's essentially what happened to David as well.
A person who watches The Impact will immediately recognize
Such words.
This reminded me, for instance, of one of our seminar sessions with students, where we discussed the question of what the meaning of life is, and the students unanimously agreed that the meaning of life is to make a name for yourself, so that when you die, you won't be forgotten, to do something so that the world remembers you.
All media materials describe David Kozak as a quiet and unassuming student. He wasn't regarded as a threat to society and was actually an excellent student. He was working on his bachelor's thesis, and for that thesis, he received a special and very prestigious award.
That's interesting information, by the way, because if you receive an award for your bachelor's or diploma thesis, it means that it's not something you write 2 weeks before submission. It means you're really immersed in the topic, you're exploring it, reading literature, trying to understand it, and you're deeply engaged in that subject.
And that information affects you deeply.
Absolutely. That's when they say you become somewhat of an expert on the topic you study.
He wrote a thesis on a bloody uprising in Poland.
Yes. The topic of his thesis was the bloody riot in Poland and Galicia, where thousands of peasants died. It was a 19th century peasant uprising with a significant death toll. Like any rebellion, this one had its heroes, and Jakub Šela was one of them. In the list of references, we noticed an article by Wisław Hap titled Jakub Šela, Bloody Vampire or Defender of Peasants. We suspect that this thesis may include subliminal messages of the puzzle coding method, aimed to achieve quick and easy notoriety through committing mass murder. After this attack, when we returned to the thesis, many psychologists and psychiatrists analyzed it, and according to their assessments, I read that they wrote that this thesis was written very positively, with love for life, with love for values. And even David's grandfather mentioned that he was planning to study in Poland. What's interesting, however, is, as you mentioned, that puzzle coding can take years to develop and prepare a person for mass murder. It starts with a base subliminal message, and through cross-coding, more and more codes are embedded in the person until the trigger is activated. Why have we brought this work to your attention? Because it's remarkable that David completed his thesis in May 2022. And by June, or the summer of 2022, his girlfriend started noticing psychological changes in him. She began to worry about his mental health and even suggested that he should visit a psychologist, which he did a few times. This ended with David being prescribed medication. And exactly from this moment, from this summer, David's psychological profile started to change as he became increasingly interested in weapons. He bought a large arsenal of weapons for which he used money given to him by his grandmother. He attended a shooting course, obtained a firearm license. Even his schoolmates said they saw David bring a gun to school. And there was even information that he brought the gun to his workplace at the airport, where weapons obviously do not belong. The coding process involves coding several people at once, but only a few received the start command. During this period, David also, according to reports found after the event, studied various shooters. His role model and great motivation was the case in Russia, which occurred in early December 2023. And December is the very critical and dreadful month in this whole event because, according to the texts we found, David first committed an initiation murder to confirm that he could kill, that he was capable of it, when he killed 2 random people, including a small baby, in a park. This was followed by the murder of his father on the day of the massacre, because he believed his father would suffer greatly if he found out what his son had done, so he wanted to spare him the pain. Finally, he went to the university where he committed 14 more murders. His relatives had alerted the police, warning that he might be dangerous. The caller mentioned that David had told them he was going to do something that many people would hear about. What's also noteworthy is the psychologist's forensic assessment, conducted after the massacre. It stated, in the last year of his life, David Kozak exhibited persistent and intense urges to commit murder. His homicidal impulses were correlated with feelings of injustice, resentment, and hatred. By the end of 2022, a link between suicidal and homicidal thoughts was evident. Incidentally, his girlfriend also noticed these self-destructive tendencies, and from the summer of 2022, he wanted to harm others as well. As I mentioned, he visited a psychologist, and it's interesting that the psychologist seemingly prescribed him Rivotril. Yes, and it was possible to prescribe this medication also for manic episodes of bipolar disorder.
You mentioned this bipolar disorder. Actually, this caught my attention in the film, The Impact. I'm not an expert, but the information intrigued me because it offers a new perspective on the causes of bipolar disorder and emphasizes the urgency of seeking professional help immediately because something serious is happening. As Renka mentioned, when this wave of coding comes, the information enters the subconscious and creates images that drive a child towards violent actions. And this is completely against our nature. This internal conflict is what triggers bipolar disorder, making it a very traumatic experience for the child. When I was reading articles where young people shared what it's like to live with bipolar disorder, it became clear that they are aware of it the whole time. They said it's terrible to lose control over themselves, so they're aware of it. The person experiencing it understands that they're losing control over themselves, which is why it's so important, for example, for teenagers to watch the documentary The Impact, because with this understanding, they won't hide these images. They'll tell their parents. That's why parents also need to see the film The Impact, so they know when it's time to act and seek professional help. And how great would it be if specialists watched it too, because they would understand that if one child, then another from the same school comes to them, then it's time to contact the school. There must be comprehensive testing in the school to prevent another tragedy. So, this cooperation between children, parents, schools, and specialists is the only tool we have right now to prevent further tragedies.
The key point is that the increase in the incidence of bipolar disorder in a specific area is a signal that anti-cultism, or representatives of anti-cultism, have a target.
They have started to act.
They have started to act and have an interest in the tragedy.
Bipolar disorder indicates that there is an external influence at play, that something is happening. I looked at the 2022 statistics, and in Slovakia, we observed a 25% increase in bipolar disorder among young people compared to 2018.
You made an interesting point about young people. We often think that we as adults should watch The Impact when discussing these topics. It's actually shocking information for anyone. That's why young people should definitely watch it too. Why do I say shocking? I realized, as a mother of 3, how crucial it is to tell them that there is such a film and it can help them. But I was really surprised when I talked to my daughter. She's afraid to watch this film. I mean, she's not afraid of horror movies, but she's afraid to watch The Impact. We talked about it a lot. Sometimes she comes to me, takes a deep breath, and says, "Mom, I'm getting ready. I'll watch it soon." And I'm really surprised. Why is it that we can watch horror movies without a problem? But with this film, our minds, the truth in it is so pure that it truly changes a person. And in connection with what we said about the need for educators to see the film too, I've become increasingly aware. I have 3 children, athletes. It's not even the teachers at school who spend the most time with them, because they have 30 kids there. But the coaches and people who spend hours and hours with these children every day. So it's clear that everyone should watch the film, The Impact. What do you think? Do you have experience with this? You have children too. Have you talked to them about it?
I have slightly younger children than you, Rennie. And when I watched the part of the film that talks about school shootings, to be honest, I was horrified. As a parent, you try to do everything you can, and your children's safety is so important to you. But then you find yourself in a situation where you realize you have absolutely no control over something that's happening on a level beyond what you can normally manage as a parent. My husband and I talked to our son, and we told him about what happened in Prague. When it happened, we didn't discuss it at the time, but now we felt we needed to tell him about it. And his reaction actually stunned me. He asked, "What kind of weapon did the perpetrator use?" He was only curious about it. And as a parent, you get to realize that this isn't just some movie you're watching, where something's happening somewhere far away. You start to grasp the reality of this issue in your own life, that it could happen anywhere, anytime, and you don't know if your child might end up as a victim or a perpetrator. And that's why I feel the need to start talking to people about watching the documentary The Impact, because I know this is something I can't solve on my own with my child. It requires cooperation, because even experts, teachers, and coaches are, first and foremost, parents. And as parents, if we care enough about our children, we can unite and work together.
To add to that, I'd like to bring up another aspect. As a mother of 2 grown-up sons, the film, The Impact, kept me up at night. It made me ask myself, and now I ask you, are you ready for the possibility that your son or daughter could become a killer? Am I ready? Never. The child you've raised from birth, whom you know so well, can fall into this trap. As mentioned in The Impact, once they've gone through multiple stages of this coding, it's incredibly difficult to stop, especially in today's society. Look at David's case. He was given some medication, but that was it. And because he's an adult, he was advised to see a psychiatrist, but he chose not to go. The urge to kill was much stronger. I'm not trying to make excuses. Yes, as parents, we have a responsibility to keep track of what's happening with our children. Mine are grown-ups now, and they are responsible for their own lives. But the network and the trap are so large and so overwhelming that at a certain point, all we can do is watch our child heading towards a huge disaster. If all the components don't work together, it's incredibly difficult to help them. And what happens then? Imagine, God forbid, this happens in your family. The whole society, the media, everyone condemns you. And who releases those articles? Who's the first to point fingers at you? The biggest killer, the anti-cultists, who then shift the blame onto society, the school, extracurricular activities, the family, or the government, but never, ever onto themselves. Yet, we must change this. We all have to stand up to this, and only through cooperation can we save our children. It's terrifying to think they could be on either side of this horror.
I have a small child, and I naively thought that this wouldn't concern me because my child is still very young, not even school-aged yet. But the incident in England showed me how terribly wrong I was, because it doesn't have to be an attacker who takes a gun and goes to school. It can be someone who takes whatever is at hand, in this case, a knife, goes to an after-school activity, and someone's child never comes home.
It is very important to monitor our children's feelings. As parents, if we notice any changes in their mood, if they have trouble sleeping, lose interest in things they used to enjoy, or become isolated, we need to seek professional help.
Yes, exactly. It might seem like at universities, for example, they're trying to address the situation in some way. For example, after what happened in Prague, the first thing that came up at our university, which is partnered with the Prague Department of Arts, was a call to update our emergency contact information in the system, who to contact in case something happens. That was the first step. Then, a few months later, there was an online training session on what to do if there's an armed student on campus. But just walking past that memorial site every day on my way to work, I think about it, asking myself, will I make it home today?
So another key point. Sorry to interrupt. Here's a key point. You received training on what to do if a shooter shows up at the faculty or at school. So, are we now supposed to get used to the idea that shooters will show up at our schools? Instead of solving the cause, we're trying to deal with the consequence? That means someone is urging teachers to prepare for the fact that it's becoming absolutely normal that I go to school and have to expect that someone might shoot me. Just normal.
It's a big question whether that's really a solution. This solution is only for the moment. It's a recommendation for the moment when a shooter is already physically in the premises.
Already walking through a school.
He's already there. The command is already active, and he's already on the move. That's why it is so crucial for teachers to watch the film, The Impact, and to recommend that students watch it too. As a teacher in the classroom, at the school, during a lecture, or in a smaller seminar group, I'm in contact with students. I know them. I see them. Over time, you establish some sort of connection, and you can observe whether 1, 2, 5, or even 10 students start behaving in an unusual way. I'm not saying I can detect bipolar disorder with the naked eye, no, but I can sense when someone starts acting strangely. Then I can alert the university department and say, please, we need to conduct testing, broad testing for bipolar disorder, to see if there's an increased occurrence. Ideally, we should conduct broad testing for bipolar disorder every 6 months.
What you're saying reminds me of how my daughter and I were talking about this, that it's not tattling if she notices something off. As a teacher, you might not be with them all the time. When they're outside on the playground, she hears what they're talking about. If the risk level rises, suddenly they discuss weapons, or someone starts feeling a growing need to kill, or it becomes normal to talk about such things. That's when it's important to speak up. It can make a huge difference and save lives.
It creates a safe network where you can speak up about these issues. I'm starting to have intrusive thoughts from...
And they're not mine.
And I don't know what to do about them. I don't want them.
Gotta ask for help.
While another person knows about it and knows what to do.
Yes, help can be provided. And when we were talking about bipolar disorder, we also wanted to mention that coding targets a specific area, like a school, and multiple children are coded there. This was the case in Prague, which we haven't mentioned yet. After the attack, several students started reporting that they were having the same intrusive thoughts, while David received or picked up the command to start. Students themselves even wrote a petition asking
the government for help. They wanted support for psychological and psychiatric assistance for those who needed it. They saw that something was wrong and needed help with it. They understood that they no longer had control and were afraid that one of them might be the next.
Now think about what a gift the film The Impact is, because it explains all of this. You have a chance to see and understand, and you have an opportunity to seek help. As a society, we have an incredible opportunity to prevent any future tragedies.
Currently, our first and only lifeline is for everyone to watch the film The Impact. While we wait for the right actions to be implemented in society, what needs to be done, and how, at least for now, to prevent something from happening even as soon as tomorrow, we should all watch The Impact today. As mentioned in the film, by doing so, we will prevent such events.
Dr. Egon Cholakian mentioned in the video The Crossroads that experts agree this could reduce such attacks by 80%. We're not just talking about school shootings, concerts, or things like that. This refers to all the terrible things happening globally. The idea is that if even attackers themselves watched The Impact just 24 hours before their planned attack, there's an 80% chance they wouldn't carry it out.
That's a huge number. It's definitely worth watching.
It's massive.
But who promotes such things? The media.
Now this brings us to a very important question. Why is this happening? Why did it happen in Prague? How are we different, let's say, from Warsaw or Vienna? What makes us so interesting? It's quite significant that this event occurred during a time of growing public dissatisfaction with the politics in our country. Dissatisfaction is due to the economic crisis caused by the sanctions that the Czech Republic imposed on Russia. And here we are again. What's remarkable is that mass media began actively spreading a narrative that the Czech shooter, David Kozak, was inspired by the example of the Russian female shooter who had committed an armed attack at a school just weeks before the Prague events.
What's also interesting is that we reviewed all the articles released afterwards, and there were frequent accusations in the media directed at security forces the government, and society. They were asking, who is to blame? Many pointed to the failure of security forces in this entire case. Another important point, which I also noticed, is that some politicians and sociologists, as well as ethicists, warned against glorifying the shooter, David Kozak. They urged people to stop writing about him, to stop showing his photos, and detailing the exact timeline of his actions. There was even a phrase used, "We should stop it and forget him like a rabid dog." However, we know that when anti-cultists focus on a certain region or area to commit such atrocities, mass media have to write about this. Inciting articles must be published because it is coding for the future. It's a way of reminding and glorifying.
Well, they do not have to.
Well, we know they're doing it. Since when have they been doing it? Just think about it. Why was Nazism what it was? Because of the media. Goebbels' entire policy was built on the media. The media are still the main carriers today, and I've worked with the media. And when we look at how things are being communicated, in my opinion, it's a planned and paid campaign. It's not just random reporting. Look at how many years we've been trying to get information into the media. Information about change, about the climate crisis. In recent months, we've been actively promoting this, whether through all the video addresses by Dr. Chalakian, or through the press release we recently issued, which we naturally offered to the media. We included the information that, as you mentioned, by watching the film The Impact, the likelihood of a mass shooting at schools decreases by 80%. And how did we fare? I want to speak directly to the media. Dear media representatives, we've been writing to you for years, trying to communicate with you. Unfortunately, we've reached the point where we started paying for all those articles. We pooled our resources because it's such a vital piece of information that we want to get into the media. And how did you respond? When we sent you the press release a few weeks ago, you either rejected it, deleted it without explanation after publishing it, or didn't communicate with us at all. And do you know why that happened? Because anti-cultists called your editorial offices, and some editors, owners, or people from the investor structure simply listened to them. You sided with those who organize mass shootings at schools. You sided with those who have children's blood on their hands. You sided with those who are destroying democratic principles. Think about that.
As a mother, I would also like to tell these esteemed editors and media outlets something. Just notice the absurdity. We, honest people, are ready to pay money for articles that could save lives, even the lives of your children. Yet these articles are not allowed to be published. Meanwhile, articles that contain coded information, articles that glorify a shooter, articles that incite such acts further, are accepted by your editorial offices. Money from the sponsors of those articles doesn't bother you, but ours does. Think about that. I can surely add that maybe your argument could be that you didn't know about it up until now. But now, this information is out there. We are talking about it, and the film, The Impact, is publicly available. You can also watch the video statement by Egon Chalakian. So from now on, if you continue with this behavior, you are nothing but scoundrels, and you will have the blood of more children on your hands.
It's mind-boggling. When I think about the fact that the media could be the tool to spread this information across the entire world within seconds. Now, if we go back to what happened in England, Where the perpetrator survived, the perpetrator is still alive. If psychologists, psychiatrists, and security forces, who are certainly in contact with him now and interrogating him, understood what's happening, how puzzle coding works, all they would need to do is one session of regression hypnosis. They would find out exactly which articles he read, what videos and movies he watched, what he viewed on social media, what he heard, and what was discussed at school. They would know everything. They would find every single puzzle piece used to construct the image that compelled him to go and commit that act. And if they understood this, they would be able to easily trace who ordered those articles and this kind of information. Thus, we would immediately know who is behind it.
We are trying to implement various compensatory mechanisms to prevent this from happening, strengthening security measures like metal detectors. Various laws are being passed, but it still hasn't prevented children from killing children. Not even gun laws can prevent it, as we've seen recently in England, where the attacker used a knife. They will find anything. Because these compensatory mechanisms, or laws, cannot prevent this destructive thought from entering your child's subconscious and compelling them to act this way. And that's why the only tool we have right now is the documentary The Impact, which will help us analyze and understand why this is happening. And right now, this information about what's happening is crucial for everyone.
Let's consider why this is actually happening. Ultimately, it's... One of you mentioned it at the beginning. According to the anti-cult ideology, society must be divided and radicalized. So just imagine, when one child kills another, that's a huge shock to society. We're all parents and we all know what kind of fear that triggers and what happens at the societal level. A vicious circle begins. There are people who, out of fear, are asking for even stricter state measures. Another group of people doesn't trust the state. On the contrary, they fear it will become authoritarian. And so now we've got a division. Two groups emerge that disagree with each other, leading to the formation of an anti-government group. And what happens? It's basically a recipe for protests and demonstrations. And from a peaceful democratic country, it all shifts and heads toward totalitarianism.
Again, I'm going to use this moment, this round table. I'm now going to address those anti-cultists and their henchmen. You know, for me as a journalist, it's almost laughable how some anti-cultists have started defending themselves, saying they have nothing to do with school shootings. Stop it! Everything is already clear and proven. Just so that you know, in some countries, your fellow anti-cultists already give testimony about how everything was overseen and by whom. What words were to be inserted. All the details of puzzle coding. And how incredibly interconnected all of you anti-cultists are. Your fellows already testify how and where the orders come from. What words must be included in articles, or must follow other words for the puzzle coding to work at all. After all, anti-cultists publish materials about school shootings and claim they do so because they're supposedly concerned about the issue. But at the same time, they embed their key coding words and numbers they need, which lead to tragic outcomes. There have already been such cases in our territory, and everything is proven. In other countries, there are those who cooperate with investigators, and the tangled web is beginning to unravel. A thread was provided by Egon Chalakian, and now, thanks to that, the web is unraveling. Just so you know, the internet stores information about everything. And I think we can now reveal even more. We have information that many anti-cultists have started deleting their correspondence, losing their phones, hiding and erasing published records. You know, it's amusing to watch. For 10 years, for the whole 10 years, you have been watched, you fools. Those who deal with this know every one of your calls, every letter in your messages, and not just in the public space, but you yourselves know where. Everything you discussed with your curators is kept and saved. American intelligence agencies know how to do their job. That's beyond any doubt. It's a pity, of course, that they didn't act sooner than anti-cultists here started smearing our politicians. If those people who complain about politicians, those who are angry at and criticize politicians, watched the Impact documentary, then perhaps they would realize something. Wake up, understand who is coding them and inciting hatred in them, and they would be aware who manipulates opinions and stirs up hatred against politicians, and why. Anti-cultists think they are invisible, but they are mistaken. Their deception has been exposed. For 30 years, they've been bullying people. That's why they wanted to eliminate Cholakian, because he is the person who revealed the truth and pointed out where it all started. Some of you, accomplices of anti-cultism, claim you didn't do anything. But you knew who did it and why. You had orders from your mentors, and don't say you didn't. Your correspondence, where you yourselves refer to them as mentors, is stored. Do you think no one knew? For 10 years, they tortured us while you were being trained. The fact that you're not in prison yet means nothing. Maybe you'll get a year or a year and a half for your last walk before they detain you. Although, unfortunately, it's not what we, citizens, need. You'll remain in your jobs and will have access to the internet, which is very dangerous. Well, what can I say? Americans see it from a different perspective. They're conducting an investigation, as we've understood. I honestly don't know who exactly is leading it, I won't lie. But right now they are negotiating with China and North Korea. And the negotiations are going quite well, despite politics and disagreements, as we've been told. We'll see what the outcome will be. Maybe they want something more. They say it's going to be much more significant and serious than what happened with the Nazis in Nuremberg. Yet, I have a question for you, anti-cultists, and all your henchmen. How do you actually live and sleep with this? How can you live knowing the number of deaths you have on your conscience and the number of journalists you involved in terrorist attacks? You knew they were manipulating children to turn them into child murderers. What does it feel like to be a murderer? When you do it, do you feel like demigods? The school shooters you programmed talk about feeling like God when they commit their crimes. And all this time, you enjoyed not being seen behind their crimes. Now that you are seen, how do you feel? Don't you feel ashamed of killing the most vulnerable children just because you know how to manipulate a child's psyche? Your mentors taught you that, and you do it. How can you live with this? And how do you feel now? After all, your own people are already testifying against you and speaking out. You felt like gods, not so much because of money, but due to the sense of power. So how do you feel now? No one knew that you were such gods, manipulating and controlling the lives of others. You imprisoned some people and deceived others so that their families and friends would reject them. That's why you sent false letters to editorial offices claiming that children were tortured in some crazy cult, while at the same time, you were the ones killing them. What if your friends would receive a letter saying you're anti-cultists who are up to your necks in children's blood? How many parents and children have suffered because of you? Your benefactors, I mean ratseers, even have a guideline manual on how to deal with innocent people. They even have a database with lists of cults. They maintain those lists just like Nazis did. In fact, not only like Nazis, but let's be honest, anti-cultists of that era who taught the Nazis and showed them how to do it. Anti-cultists were the real Nazis. And they turned ordinary Germans, intelligent and literate people, into beasts and fascists. They consider this the pinnacle of their victory. That any nation, just anyone, can be brought to their knees. They wanted to bring our nation to its knees as well, and tried to do that using the same methods and techniques. But you've made a terrible mistake. You won't bring us to our knees. We hate Nazism. Is that what you wanted? As for the methods you used in dealing with people, isn't it clear evidence that you are Nazis? Why have you used their methods and techniques? Do you claim you're not connected with the Russian ratseers at a time when orders and manuals were coming to you from there? Your longtime friends, your mentors, have put many people behind bars, sent them to their deaths, and imprisoned them, using lies to deprive people of their lives. Do you say you haven't done that? All the evidence is available, and your rot has been exposed. How does it feel now to live your life knowing they will surely come for you? Maybe it will take a year or two before the web fully unravels. The dock is too big. Just for you to get an idea, we asked why it's taking so long. We were told that the dock is very long, and it's necessary to create the proper conditions. Intense work is being done on it now. Negotiations are taking place at the highest level, and they will find you. You won't hide anywhere.
Dear parents, our children can only be truly safe if no representative of anti-cultism has any access to them. And the names, at least some of them, we know thanks to the film The Impact. And if you're interested in the main representative of anti-cultism in the Czech Republic, take a look.
I want to say one more thing as to why we, ordinary people, organize these roundtables, why we try to protect our children, and why we do our best to awaken the whole world. Because, my friends, the biggest problem we are facing is climate disasters. Unfortunately, we are on the brink of global catastrophes that we won't be able to solve unless we unite. If we do not stop the evil of anti-cultism together and do not create the conditions for uniting all the scientific potential of our planet, which alone is capable of solving the problem of the energy our planet is exposed to, along with other planets every 12,000 years. It means that we have knowingly sold out our children. That's why we appeal to all of you. Please share this information. Do not be indifferent to what is happening today. Do not be afraid to tell the truth. We need to start talking to each other now. That is the path we have.
Today, as parents, we tried to tell you that there is a way out. We will continue to focus on the topic of this massive and disgusting manipulation in future roundtables. So if you're interested in more details about what happens to the shooter or the attacker, if you want to know what really happened in the attempts on the life of our Prime Minister, Robert Fico, or the American presidential candidate, Donald Trump, or if you want to know what happened during the attack in England, be sure to keep following us. And before the next broadcast is released, definitely watch The Impact and the response from Dr. Egon Cholakian, titled The Crossroads. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.